You must stay at home. Stay at home.
Hello and welcome to Lockdown, hosted by Steve Bomford with Mike Davis-Marks. Our armed forces operate in challenging environments. Week by week, we'll explore what we can learn from their experiences.
So, a Chief Petty Officer in the Royal Navy that grew up in Zimbabwe, Steve?
Yes, and as I kind of alluded to, a landlocked country and then joins the Navy.
Yeah, not an obvious contender for the Navy, but then she arrived as a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed 19-year-old in London and wanted what to do and was in the seek of adventures, and she found one.
Absolutely. So let's have a listen to what Janine Potts has got to say. Hello, Janine, and firstly I'd like to say thank you very much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
So I've got a few questions for you. So let's kick off with, you were born in Zimbabwe and you left there at the age of 19 after what you've told me before as being a bit of a difficult childhood. Could you tell me a little bit about that, please, and why you chose to leave?
Okay. So when I say a difficult childhood, I mean it was quite complex. So I was born in Zimbabwe, third generation Zimbabwean. I was brought up in a single parent home, but lots of family around. We shared a home with my mother's siblings, my grandmother. I had loads of cousins. So I had a pretty happy childhood. And I think that goes to the fact that I think I was the first grandchild born into what they call a free Zimbabwe. So we gained independence in 1980, and I was born in 1981. So there was no color ban, and we were kind of like born free of colonial rule. So we were quite lucky because there was this euphoria of my early years where, you know, it was just really a happy childhood. That's what I recall it as. I grew up in a mixed race community. So many of my friends and family members were all from a mixed race background. We went to a mixed race school. It was just, I just remember it as being really happy, lots of memories. Things changed when I was about 13. My mum got married. We moved to a different city. So I was born in the capital, Harare. When I was 13, I moved to what was predominantly kind of like a farming, mining town called Kadoma. And at 13, things started to change for me. And I guess I was a teenager as well. I'd moved cities, making new friends. I was in a new home. I had a new stepfather. So I was adjusting to that life, but also in the country at that time. So this was about 1994, 95. The country was just changing. There was a different feel to the country at that time. And when I say that politically, we were running up to elections. People were tired of our reigning president, Robert Mugabe, because the euphoria and the things that were promised at the time of independence weren't happening. So there was a lot of political unrest about governing parties and stuff like that. Between 13 and sort of like 16, what was playing out in the cities and everywhere was, you know, us coming to understand about race divide, trying to live together. And I had mixed race friends and, you know, black and white friends. And it was having those uncomfortable conversations. And then sort of like in sort of 98, 99, there was like an unrest in the country because it was all due to people getting tired of waiting for this land reform program that was promised by the government at the time. So the land reform was all around reproportioning land that was unfairly given to white farmers. So what we saw was the people got tired. When I say the people, I meant people that were promised to be rehoused or or given land. It wasn't happening. So they decided to take the matter into their own hands. So people started to take land, basically, and a lot of my friends, people I knew, started to get affected by all of this. So everybody was really, really in this worried state of mind. And I know I was one of them, because a lot of my really close friends that I'd met since moving to Kadoma were all farmers. And I lived on a mine because my stepdad was an underground mine manager, and we had a mining community. And we just started to get just this whole unnervousness of what was going to happen next. I think in about 98, 99, there was just this mass exodus of people I knew, friends, family, of people just trying to get out of Zimbabwe, whatever means they could, whether they had British ancestry, whether they left through to asylum in other countries that were taking on people that were in this dilemma of situation, because it was a big political conversation at the time. So for me, I decided I wasn't going to leave straight away, because first of all, I hadn't got the means to leave. So I had to work out a strategy of how I could get to the point where I could either raise enough money to leave or have a plan. So my plan was to leave Kadoma, the mining town, and go work in Harare, which is the capital city, and go live with my grandmother in her house. I did that. And then an aunt in England said to me, listen, this is your plan. Let's get out of Zimbabwe and come to London and figure it out. You might not stay for long, but at least it's a starting point, because, it doesn't look like there's a bright future for you in terms of, what's happening. Because what also was happening, as well as the Rand reform, was businesses were getting affected. So when I say that, it was almost like if you weren't Black, you wouldn't get hired. So for a mixed race person, it was really quite challenging. So I left Zimbabwe at 19 and I got to London. I was so excited, and it was kind of weird because I knew I packed my bags knowing that I'm never going to return. It was quite a weird feeling for me. So I left, came to London, and it was exciting. I'd never left Africa before. It was a cultural shock. And London was just buzzing. So I really, really had an amazing first couple of months. And it was the summer. I arrived in London in the July of 2000. So you hadn't encountered the good old British rain, winter, etc. No, yet. I was like, this is lovely. It was actually a heat wave when I arrived. So I was so happy. I was like, what are people saying about snow and cold? So I was really lucky. So I got to see all the big city sites and all the amazing things in the summer. So it was really, really good. So great summer. What happened next then? So what happened next was trying to figure out, how do I stay? Do I go to college? How do I get to college? How can I live? What, do I need to get a job? How do I get a job? All of that kind of stuff. And my aunt and my family were just so really supportive. So I eventually enrolled in a college, and I got a job in the pub just across the street. I started my London journey and my London life. Okay, so how did that lead to the doors of the Royal Navy? So within sort of 3 or 6 months from that point, where I'm just so happy about life, I'm in college, I'm just living life, devastating news happened. Zimbabwe's political situation got so heightened that the relationship between the UK and Zimbabwe was really fractured. So that meant that the political agreements that were done meant that my visa was no longer possible, because I was on a what they call a free visa entry scheme. So I could arrive in England without having getting a visa before. I could get one on arrival for 6 months. I could then switch to a student visa from the UK. So I didn't have that anymore. So what it meant was I had to go back to Zimbabwe and figure it out. And I just panicked because I didn't want to go back to Zimbabwe. So I was trying to figure out, like, how can I stay? And at that time, I was so lucky in that one of my jobs that I was doing outside of college was I worked for the current Chief of Defence Staff as a domestic assistant. And he was a Royal Navy senior officer at that time. And because I worked there and I was telling them about my drama, they said to me, well, join the Navy. I was like, the Navy, what is that? And obviously I'd been working with him for a while too. And it just was like, I don't understand, what is the Navy? So they started to persuade me that the Navy would be.
Is my geography right? Zimbabwe is a landlocked country. It doesn't have a Navy, does it?
Zimbabwe is landlocked.
Right.
We don't have a Navy. I don't even think we have a fishery patrol. I don't even think we do.
Okay, so I guess you went and signed up, did you?
So I did. So off I went with my aunt to the careers office. And it was great I had her with me because she was asking all the questions, and she had lived in the UK for, I think it was more than 15 years by that time. So she was quite switched on about life in the UK. So she was asking all the questions, and we had a really good career advisor, and it seemed like really perfect. So yeah, I joined the Royal Navy as a writer. And that was in the July of 2001. So not long after I'd entered the UK in 2000.
So my mental arithmetic, that was 20 years ago.
That was 20 years ago.
Wow. So
yeah.
What have you done over those 20 years that, what are the highlights over those last 20 years and what are you currently doing?
So I've had an amazing career. 20 years I've served in a variety of roles. I've served on ships. I've done overseas deployments. I've done operational deployments. So I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So yeah, it's been so exciting. I've met so many nice people. I've met my closest friends. I've just traveled the world and been to places that you never dreamt you would be. So yeah, it's been so amazing. So yeah, 20 years I've got promoted to Chief Petty Officer. And I'm so excited about that because it's quite hard and competitive to get to that rank. So I'm really happy that I got to that rank. And I passed my AIB in February.
Congratulations.
So that means that I'm now in the pot to get extracted for selection for officer training if I meet the criteria. So fingers crossed. So yeah, currently I'm working for Rear Admiral Mike Utley, who is the Navy appointed race and ethnicity advocate.
Gosh, what does that entail? What do you do? What's your job look like?
So the race and ethnicity advocacy space is quite complex, but it's really quite exciting. So it was created, it's a standing role, and the role gets changed over every 2 years. So Admiral Utley is the new incumbent. And obviously the events of 2020 have meant that activity in that space is kind of heightened. So I've been recruited in a full-time role to support in that function because our Rear Admiral is quite a busy admiral. He's also a command strike. So I'm helping his team and the Navy D&I policy team to have the conversations. So a lot of it is to create conditions where we can have sensible and open conversations about race and racism. And how he's done that, or we've done that, is providing opportunities for people to have those conversations. It's been difficult over COVID, but we've done much of it over Zoom, which is great because we've still had that conversation going. We also support communities, so communities can come to us with anything that they think needs to be brought to our attention or the Navy's attention, and we help the Navy kind of advocate on that behalf. We speak to stakeholders, and we champion policies and things that break the barriers to whatever the communities have raised to us.
So it's kind of a way for the Navy to respond to some of the challenges that some of the
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, and a way that we can hold the organization to account. And sometimes the things that we bring in the advocacy space to the stakeholders' attention, might not align with current or previous ways of thinking.
Yep.
So we're there to kind of bridge the gap, educate, signpost, and we also speak to people within the rest of the MOD and outside of the MOD to get best practices on how people are navigating, those open conversations that can be quite challenging.
Yep, I can understand that. So I guess it's also about your lived experience, but what inspired you to take on this role? Because, let's be honest, if you look at the Navy, it's looked at from the outside. Obviously, I've not been in the Navy. It's quite a traditional sort of organisation. So bearing all that, that's my perception of it. But what inspired you to take on this role and maybe try and affect change from the inside?
The Navy is diverse. So we have all people from all walks of life joining the Navy. So when you talk about diversity, we are diverse. I think what's quite apparent looking outside in is sometimes it can be underrepresented. So, if you from an underrepresented community, you're kind of looking for that face, but because we are kind of lacking in numbers, it's hard to get that representation across. So it can be quite challenging if you just look at the Navy just on the face value, like looking at images or, that it appears that it's not diverse, but actually we're here, but it's just we're underrepresented. So that's the challenge of how we kind of change that narrative.
Okay. So I think that's important work for sure, isn't it? So in your role, what do you hope to achieve, looking forwards? What would you like to change, if anything?
There's a lot that we have to change, but I think for me, it's education. We just want to be able to provide an education repository and have those safe and open conversations that are uncomfortable, to be honest, because any conversation talking about racism, race, nationality, ethnicity, and how that fits in has a lot to do with how UK society are, but also how those things can have an effect on what already is happening within the organization. So definitely the education piece for everyone is what I really, really hope to achieve in this role, and that we can have those conversations as difficult as they are, because what I found is we can't change the past, but we can change the future. And the contemporary Navy is what's important for us now. So to help get the organization ready for those future leaders that are coming through is what's really, really important. And looking at things strategically and really unpicking what people define as the challenges versus the data, and making sure that the anecdotal evidence is understood in the data. And that's sort of what we're trying to do in the advocacy space, and listening to what the communities are telling us, and things that we could do better.
Wow, that sounds like quite an important job. I wish you the best of luck with that. So I've got one final. Sorry.
Thank you so much for having me.
No. I've got one final question. Don't go yet.
Okay.
What else do you want to achieve with your life in terms of this conversation we're having now? I guess I'm talking about when you leave the Navy. Have you thought about that, or is that just too far into the future for you at the moment?
Oh, no, I'm thinking about it. I have a 22-year engagement, and I'm obviously on year 20, so that runs out in 2 years. Obviously, I've passed the AIB, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get extracted, and if I am, then that's great. That opens up a whole new world, Steve. But if not, I think I'm thinking about, what I'd like to do after this exciting experience that I've had in the Navy, and all the skills that I've got, and how I can reach into the community. I'm already engaged with communities outside of the Navy, outside of Navy stuff. Like I'm a Duke of Edinburgh assessor, and I do a lot of voluntary work within the Duke of Edinburgh world in terms of youth. So I'd definitely like to do more of that. I'd also like to kind of like do something different to the Navy. Like, I don't know, I've been thinking about virtual assisting. So working from home and doing some virtual assisting. I've been thinking about going to university, because I don't have a degree and I want to go to university to get a degree. I've tried several times, but it just hasn't happened. So I've been thinking about maybe going to uni and becoming a full-time student.
What would you want to study?
Well, I've because of all of the stuff that's happened to me in my life in the last sort of 5 years, I'm so interested in naval history, ethnic minority history within the Navy, and how that sort of unpicks. I'm keen to do a little bit more on social researching. That's kind of drawing me. I just love listening to the stories and stories of people that have gone before us, about their life. I'm so fascinated by it. And also I'm charged and passionate because I am in the Navy and served in the Navy. So I'm really interested in that. So let's see what happens.
I think you've got the perfect qualifications for that, if I'm honest, Janine.
Thank you, Steve. Let's see.
Let's see. Well, do let us know. I mean, it would be great to find out how you get on with that, and very good luck with the extraction, if I've got that phrase right, for the officer candidacy.
Yeah, the officer extraction. Yeah, sounds weird when you say that. Selection, officer selection. Let's say that better.
Okay. Well, the best of luck with that, and thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, Mike, that was an energetic interview, wasn't it?
She was very excited, wasn't she? But also, quite powerful what she's been involved in and doing. And actually, just taking you back to the start of the interview, could you imagine what being a child was like in Zimbabwe back in the sort of the 1990s, growing up in Zimbabwe?
In a word, no. I mean, obviously we see kind of the media reports when everything goes a bit wrong, I suppose. It's obviously a place that's had a lot of political turmoil. But no, I can't imagine what that must be like as a child. It must be so very confusing.
Well, I think when she was very young, there was a lot of hope as Zimbabwe gained independence that a new rainbow nation would grow. And then after a while, restlessness stepped in, as she talked about. There was a frustration and lack of progress on land reform, and things started to get a little bit more concerning.
Very much so, but I'm not sure how much she would have understood about it as well. As a young person, the backstory, the politics, I just confusing. That's what I would have taken from that.
Well, she arrived in London age 19, so she probably knew a bit by then. She knew enough to say, I don't think I need to stay here any longer. And she was lucky enough to have an aunt to invite her over. And she also was mature enough to say that she knew she'd never return.
Yeah, that was one of the most striking things I thought of the early part of the story, that she just made that decision. All power to her. Yeah,
fantastic. Imagine arriving in London in the year 2000. This is the year before 9/11, in fact, around 2001. And, this cosmopolitan city, very different to everything she's seen, and exciting, and somehow she ended up as a domestic assistant to a senior officer in the Navy, who said, have you thought about joining the Navy? So she did.
Of course, seems like the obvious thing to do, really, doesn't it?
Don't we all do that? Anyway, so she joined as a writer, and for the benefit of your listeners, the writing branch, which is part of the logistics main branch, are personnel that look after people. They're HR. They do a lot of the clerk and admin, payroll. They're pretty crucial to the running of the Navy. You've had a logistics people on before. They kind of sort of hold everything together, really.
Make sure you get paid then whilst you're driving your submarines. Is that what they do?
Yeah, that's very important to get paid. Sailors certainly trip about it if they don't, but luckily these things are very rare. She talked about she got very excited at this point about joining the Navy, having talked about coming from a landlocked, country. But she's been in it 20 years, so she's given it a fair whack. And she talked about this amazing career, ships, at sea, in Afghanistan, all over the world. She as a former director of recruiting, she's doing the recruiting job pretty well for us.
I think so. You should have had her as a poster girl, really, to advertise the Royal Navy. I
thought that, actually. I'd written down recruiting poster, so you're absolutely right. And here she is now as a Chief Petty Officer, which is a senior non-commissioned officer rank, with a lot of responsibility, a role model to everyone joining the Navy, under her. And she's also passed the Admiralty interview. She said AIB, Admiralty Interview Board, which is a grueling 2.5-day test to see whether you've got potential to become an officer.
Sounds like she has, but I'm certainly no expert.
Well, she's got bags of enthusiasm, and that's always one of the things that they look for. And she's now waiting, I expect, with bated breath, to see whether she gets selected for officer training. She used the word extracted, which may be a new buzzword. I haven't heard it. But she's basically hoping that out of the pool of people that have passed, she's going to get the nod to go and do officer training at Dartmouth.
Excellent. So fingers crossed for Janine then.
Fingers crossed for Janine. She talked about her role as sort of working as the diversity and race champion. And I thought that was really interesting because we haven't spent much time talking about that on the podcast so far. But I was really pleased that she sort of opened the lid a bit and talked about what they do, creating conditions, safe environments to talk about race and, and increasing the diversity and opportunities for everybody in the Navy, the armed forces, really. So I thought fantastic, all power to her elbow.
Mm. I mean, it's such a difficult subject to talk about sometimes, isn't it? Because it's very politicised. There's almost invariably so much going on in the outside world, overseas. So it's a difficult subject to talk about and deal with in some ways, well, many ways.
You're right. We're recording this the day after the verdict on the George Floyd murder. So it's very poignant that we're talking about it now. And obviously it's something that affects a lot of people. But I served in the Navy for 36 years. And I do think actually it is one of the most race neutral, equal opportunity, diverse organisations that I know. And it has changed over those 36 years, well, 45 now. But I always thought it was a meritocracy rather than anything else.
That's good to hear. I mean, I don't really have any personal experiences to draw upon where that's concerned, I'm afraid.
No. Lovely statement she made about you can't change the past, but you can change the future. And in contemporary Navy, that's what they want to do. So sounds really exciting. And then you asked her, what your last question was, what does she want to achieve? And she mentioned being extracted as an officer again and a whole new world, and got very excited again, which is great. I love her passion. I love the excitement she has. It's very infectious. I wish everyone could catch this particular viral contagion.
You can imagine as we have a chat with guests before they come on board. So you can imagine what that was like. That was quite an exuberant chat, and in a very positive way as well. So yes.
So did you tell her to tone it down for the recording, or was that how the preliminary ran?
That's probably a bit toned down. Yes, it's more to do with the actual recording technique, because if there's lots of laughter and giggling, it messes all the sound levels. But you don't want to dampen a person's enthusiasm and personality. All
right, so I'm not allowed to laugh and giggle now, am I?
Do you ever laugh and giggle? Unless it's at me.
Well, there you go. Anyway, so she talked about what the future holds for her. If she gets extracted as an officer, selected for officer training, then that was a whole new world and lots of excitement there. But if that doesn't happen, I thought she was very balanced here. That there's lots of things that are outside of the Navy that she talk about the Duke of Edinburgh's youth scheme as an assessor, and that's quite appropriate. Things we've just had the funeral of HRH Prince Philip, and that's a fantastic organisation, the Duke of Edinburgh.
I can imagine her doing that as well. I think the sort of enthusiasm that we keep alluding to would be a real motivator and inspiration to young people. I could, as I say, really imagine her doing that.
I think it's one of the most important leadership traits is to have passion and enthusiasm for what you're doing, and if you can then inspire and motivate other people through that, then that's a great thing. So she talked about going to university and getting a degree. Well, in naval history.
I didn't expect that. We hadn't discussed that at all. I thought naval history. I didn't. You can never judge a book by its cover, can you? But I really didn't expect that.
Never judge a history book by its cover. And what do you make of virtual assisting?
I don't know, really. I thought it did seem something that seemed an odd choice for her. I thought she had more to offer. I think her people skills are really good as well. So why? Do you have some sort of insight that I don't, probably?
Well, I'm always virtually assisting you, for heaven's sake.
It's a full-time job. It's very demanding looking after me, assisting me. Sorry.
Here am I laughing and giggling again. Anyway, no, I suspect that her passion and enthusiasm needs to be seen in the flesh. I think physically she would really inspire and motivate people rather, she probably does it on Zoom, but much more powerfully in a physical presence.
Yeah, coming back to the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, wasn't there something that I think a link I may have sent you where they were talking about the experience, giving young people an experience? And I think she'd be able to draw on her own experience as well and tell a story about, challenging circumstances that led to, a 20-something year career in the Royal Navy. Yeah,
I think it's amazing. If you look at her journey from child growing up in Zimbabwe to Chief Petty Officer selected for potential officer training, it's an amazing journey and one to inspire anybody, I suspect.
Absolutely.
Well, okay, so that's another one in the can.
It is. Thank you very much, Mike.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for listening. The Royal Navy and Royal Marines charity exists to support sailors, Marines and their families for life. If you or someone you know could do with some support, give them a call on 023 93 87 1568 or drop them an email on support@rnrmc.org.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please subscribe.